Okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Um, so our topic for today is about continuity, and this is actually half of the topic of to be discussed. This is half of the topic to be discussed for chapter 2, which is entitled Limits and Continuity. Okay, so if you are to define continuity, I think the definition of continuity is pretty much self-explanatory because di ba, from the word continuity, it comes from the root word continue or continuous, meaning duro-diretso. Okay. And since we are talking about functions and graphs of functions, so when we say continuity, we're actually talking about the continuity of functions. And pag continuity and yun, continuity of function. And for you to understand continuity, we're actually be discussing the discontinuity of function. So, kailan ba nagkakaroon ng discontinuity ang isang function? So, we have here several types of discontinuity. And as we go on, we will try to discover the criterias of a continuous function. Okay, so i-define lang natin ang mga discontinuity for us to define what is continuity. Okay, so number one types of discontinuity, we have here what we call number one, we have here what we call the missing point discontinuity. Yan. So, ano ba ang missing point discontinuity na yan? Okay, so, we have an example here. Suppose we have f of x, a function of x, is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 4 all over x plus 2. Yan. Okay. Actually, this function is somewhat similar to the f of x is equal to x plus 2. Okay, let me show you why. Okay. If we construct the table of values for both of these functions, we will see that these functions are somewhat similar. So, for example, for this function, we have here x and the value of f of x. Okay, so this one right here, say 0, 1, 2. If we try to solve for the values of f of x using this function, and if we try to substitute 0 to x's here, we will find that f of x is actually equal to 2. And when you substitute 1 to this function right here, your value of f of x will be equal to 3. Okay, and if you substitute 2 here, your value of f of x will be equal to 4. Okay, and if we try to construct also the table of values for this function, so see we have here x, and we have here f of x. Okay, and we have same lang how 0, 1, 2. Okay, and if we try to get the values of f of x, we'll arrive at the same numbers. So you see, these two functions are actually on top of the other. Parang they are traversing the same line. If we try to graph these two functions. Okay, so if they are similar, they are somewhat similar, but they are not the same because may nira pagkakaiba. Hain ba diin nagkakaiba? Okay, the answer lies within this this quantity right here. Ito nga denominator. Because, diba, as we know, if the denominator of a function is equal to 0, Okay, if the denominator of the function is equal to 0, then that function or the value of that quantity or that function will generate an undefined value. Okay, but division of 0 is not allowed because any number divided by 0 is undefined. Okay, so for example, for 4x is equal to negative 2, this function right here will be undefined, while this function right here will generate a value equal to 0. That's a real number. 0 is also a real number. Okay, so ang adding a function undefined, tas ang adding a function is an iya value and f of x is real number, and that is 0. So the difference between the two is that this function is undefined only when x is equal to negative 2. Ibig sabihin, this function has a missing point. Diba? May niya missing point. That's why it's called missing point discontinuity. Okay? Tinatawag siyang missing point discontinuity because a single point is missing. And that is, what is that point? That is negative 2, 0. Negative 2, 0. Yan. Negative 2, 0 cannot be found here because when you substitute negative 2 at this function, the value is not 0. That is actually infinite or undefined. That's why it's called the missing point discontinuity. Okay. Now, based on the definition of the missing point discontinuity, di ba, may discontinuous siya when x is equal to negative 2 because it has no real value for f of x. So, based on that definition, we can say that a function is discontinuous. A function is only discontinuous if, if f of a, when we say f of a, that's any value of x. Okay, let me erase this one first. Okay. A certain function is continuous only if f of a exists. Ibig sabihin, f of a is real number. So, for example, masaring ako, for x is equal to negative 2. When you substitute negative 2 dida, the value of f of x is equal, or f of negative 2. Wait lang. The value of f of negative 2 is equal to, this is negative 2 plus 2, and this is equal to 0. So, the value of f of negative 2 is equal to 0. So, ibig sabihin, na real number man, this 0 right here is a real number. Ibig sabihin, f of a exists. Okay, so, if f of a exists, then we can say that that function is continuous. Okay? Kasi kung if it does not exist, ibig sabihin, when you substitute negative 2 to the function, the value is undefined. That's not a real number. That the value of f of a does not exist. Ibig sabihin, that function is discontinuous. And we call that discontinuity as the missing point discontinuity. Okay, so this okay, so number one criteria to identify to say if a certain function is continuous is that dapat an f of a exists. But it's not always the case. Because, for example, for this example, okay, we have another example. Say, for example, we have f of x is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2x. Yan. So, for example, we have f of x is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2x. And say, ginpapabiling an ginpapakianhan ka if the function is continuous at x equal to 2. At x is equal to 2. Okay. Masaring ka, nayakang kang ginahi, sir, and ang criteria para makayakan nga an usa nga function continuous at a certain value of x is that if f of a exists. So imo iso-substitute an 2 nga da. So yun, masaring ka f of 2 is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2 times 2. So this is equal to the square root of 4 minus 4, and therefore your f of 2 is equal to square root of 4 minus 4 is 0. Square root of 0 is 0. So 0. 0 is a real number. So nasa ka, nag-i-exist and valuehan f of a. Okay, for this type of function. Okay, but this is not actually the case, because if you can still remember dito an atong discussion and limits, these types of function, radical function, the right hand limit and the left hand limit does not approach to the same value, diba? That's why an aton answer and this type of problem is limit does not exist. Let me explain why. Okay, so if you can still remember, okay, so suppose we have x and we are using the same function, this function right here. We are using the same function. F of x is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2x. So if we construct the table of values, we have our x and the f of x. Okay. Okay, suppose another point. Suppose ano din ni an 2. Okay. So the value of 2, the value of f of x when x is 2, the value of f of x is 0, diba? Okay. And if the value of f of x just to the left of the of 2, and that is, say for example, 1. Okay. So the value when this is 1, okay, so when this is 1, this will be equal to, okay, butang ko lang din ha, the square root of 4 minus 2 times 1. This is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2, and that is the square root of 2, diba? So this is square root of 2. Square root of 2 is still a real number. So ibig sabihin, it exists. Okay? Negative 2, it's still a real number. And if this is 0, so this is 0, for square root of 4, this is 2. Okay. Now, what will happen if we substitute a number just to the right of x of 2? Okay, just to the right. Bisan, even just a small amount, just to the right of 2. So, for example, 2.01. Okay. What will happen if we substitute it to the equation? Okay, let me write it here. Okay, so it's a substitute ko. This is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2 times 2.01. Yan. So this is equal to the square root of 4 minus 4.02. Diba? 4.02. And if we subtract this one, this is 4 minus 4.02. This is equal to the square root of negative 0.02. So, an answer nimo is mag-yield ka hin imaginary number. Mag-yield ka hin imaginary number. And that means, okay, so this is imaginary. Butang ko na lang dila I, ha? Although that's not exactly I. May dapat ito niya small numerical coefficient. Basta the point is, the value, if the value of f of x, if your value for x is somewhere greater than 2, bisan just a tiny amount, bisan guti ilang amount, basta greater than 2, your value of f of x will be imaginary. Ibig sabihin, hindi real. So, ibig sabihin, if this is the case, this function is discontinuous at x is equal to 2. Okay. So this function is discontinuous at x is equal to 2. And how do we define this function? This function, based on what we have learned in limit in the previous topic, we can say that the limit of this function when x approaches a certain number from the left is not equal. Take note ha, is not equal when you solve for the limit of f of x when x approaches to the same number coming from the right. Diba? This is the case kasi for this for this function. So when if this is true, when the right hand limit and the left hand limit are not equal, then we can say that function is discontinuous. What type of discontinuity is that? That type of discontinuity is what we call one-sided limit. Let me write it here. The type of discontinuity is what we call, number 2 ito niya, one-sided limit. One-sided limit. Or sometimes this is called, this occurs in radical function. In radical functions. So you have to remember this type of discontinuity. And one-sided limit, this is when the left-hand limit and the right-hand limit of the function are not equal. Okay. So based on this definition of one-sided limit, we can create another criteria where we can say that a certain function is continuous. Ang una kanina, di ba? Remember? Ang una nato nga nahimo, nayakang kita kanina, that is when f of a exists. Di ba? That is when f of a exists. But this is not just the only criteria, because we have proof na sometimes if f of a exists, sometimes the function is still not continuous. Sometimes may discontinuity. Another example of that is this function. And we have learned that this type of discontinuity is what we call one-sided limit. Okay, so we will create another criteria where we can see that a certain function is continuous. So another criteria would be that is that is when the limit of f of x from the left is equal to the limit of f of x from the right. Okay, so that is that the left hand limit and the right hand limit are equal. So kung equal nga ni hira, ibig sabihin continuous. Diri iya one-sided limit. So kung equal nga ni, that means mag-equal nga ni it left hand limit and right hand limit. We can say that the limit of f of x as x approaches to a also exist. Yan. Diba? Because when the left hand and the right hand limit of the function are equal, then ibig sabihin the limit exists. So if the limit exists, okay? If the limit exists at identified value of x, then ibig sabihin that function is continuous. Okay, but not always ha, kasi bangin na exist ngayon hiya, pero an f of a ngayon is does not exist. So ibig sabihin that function is still not continuous, and that's what we call the missing point discontinuity. What I'm trying to say here is that kailangan ini nga duduha dapat satisfied ini nga duduha for us to say that a certain function is continuous at an identified value of x. Okay? Okay. So another example that I want to give you is this one. Wait lang. F of x, what's happening? F of x is equal to 3x plus 2. 3x plus 2. That is when x is equal to less than or equal to negative 2. Less than or equal to negative 2. And we also have 1 minus 2x. 1 minus 2x. That is when x is greater than negative 2. So we have here a piecewise function. Okay, so we are to find the continuity of this function, or the discontinuity of the function at x is equal to negative 2. So yung papakiana and discontinuity or continuity at x is equal to negative 2. So how do we determine? Okay, nayakang kanginan unang criteria. If the f of a exists, so nag-exist ba? Nag-exist. Okay, let us try. Okay, when we substitute negative 2 here, okay, so the value of f of x, f of negative 2, okay, the question is, which of these two it aton gagamiton? Is it the 3x plus 2 or the 1 minus 2x? Okay, so hain dito aton gagamiton. Okay, the value of x is equal to negative 2. So makita ka dito boundary condition. Nasa dito boundary condition, if x is equal to less than if x is less than or equal to negative 2, ang imo gamiton is yan hi. And when x is greater than negative 2, you will use this function right here. So since an aton ginbibiling is the value of the function when x is equal to negative 2, so clearly amoy hi yan hi. Diba? X daw is less than or equal. Taka equal to negative 2 man ang x. So ginbibiling natin ang valuehan function when x is equal to negative 2. So natong gagamiton is yan hi. So this will be 3 times negative 2 plus 2. And the value is, negative 6 plus 2. And this is equal to negative 4. Okay, so negative 4 is a real number. Ibig sabihin, na-satisfy natin ang unang criteria. Ano ito? Ang unang criteria, that is f of a exists. Okay, so check ang unang criteria. Ang ikaduhang criteria, dapat daw ang left hand and right hand limit are equal. Ibig sabihin, f of a, the limit of that function as x approaches to a exist. Okay? The limit of that function daw as x approaches to a, for this case a is equal to negative 2, dapat nag-i-exist daw ang limit. Okay, let us try to understand kung nag-i-exist ba. Since this is a piecewise function, pinakamaupay natin nga himuon is to find first for the left and right, the left hand limit and the right hand limit. So we have here the limit of the f of x, adiha, define na natin yung f of x, this function, as x approaches to 2 coming from the left. To the left of negative 2, ibig sabihin lower than negative 2. And that is negative 1, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. Lower than negative 2. Diba? Okay, if you have a number line here, did it negative 2, adi naman negative 1, did it 0, did it negative 3, negative 4. So, anything to the left is lower than negative 2. So, ibig sabihin, if you are approaching from the left, ang imo gagamiton nga function is this one. Diba? Kaya nakan man di x daw is less than or equal to negative 2. Less than man. So, to the left ito niya. So, at atong gagamiton is yan nga 3x plus 2. So, when x is approaching from the left, the value of the limit is equal to 3 times negative 2 plus 2 is equal to, this is negative 6 plus 2, and this is equal to 4. This is equal to negative 4. Ibig sabihin, the limit of the function f of x as x approaches to 2 coming from the left is negative 4. This is your left hand limit. Kaya, that is your left hand limit. Okay, how about the right hand limit? Okay, let us solve for the right hand limit, and that is the limit of the same function f of x as x approaches to 2 coming from the right. Diba? As x approaches to 2 coming from the right naman. To the right of negative 2 are numbers higher than negative 2. And that includes negative 1, 0, 1, and so on and so forth. So, as x approaches to 2 coming from the right. And when you substitute that one, okay, when you substitute that one, di ba, coming from the right, let me have another, if this is negative 2, negative 1, and negative 3. Okay. Coming from the right daw, so that is negative 1. Ipakadihan negative 2. Okay, so to the right, example of to the right is our numbers. To the right of negative 2 are numbers that are higher than negative 2. So, greater than negative 2. So, imo gagamiton dinhi for this type of function. For this case, di ba, kay higher than negative 2, kay approaching to negative 2 from the right. Okay, so ang imo gagamiton is this function because according to the boundary condition na yakan, x daw is greater than negative. So, ato nga function ito gagamiton. So, this will be 1 minus 2 times 2 negative, sorry, this is negative 2 pala ha. I'm sorry, wala ko kabulang. This is negative 2. This is negative 2. Okay, so this is negative 2. Yan. So, this is equal to 1 minus negative 2 times negative 2 magiging plus 9. This is 4. So, this is equal to 5. So, ibig sabihin, the right-hand limit of f of x as x approaches to negative 2 coming from the right is equal to 5. So, this is your function. Your limit pala. This is your limit. The right-hand limit. Okay, as you can see, the left-hand limit and the right-hand limit are not equal. Meaning, okay, we satisfied the ibig sabihin ni we satisfied we did not satisfy the second criteria. Kay limit does not exist man di ba? The limit does not exist for this case. Ibig sabihin, ang atong criteria nga ikaduha, and that is the limit of f of x as x approaches a should also exist. Dili man niya na-exist. Ibig sabihin, this function, ini nga function is discontinuous at x is equal to negative 2. Ipakiana, what type of discontinuity is this? Okay. Ano nga type of discontinuity inihiya? Okay, let me okay. You can see this figure. So, ini amin hiya an graph. This is the graph. Wait lang ha, ikaliko didi. Okay, yan. This is the graph of this function right here. Ini nga function. This function, the graph of this function is this one. Okay. Kita niyo? If you are coming from the left, okay, amo niya an inihang graph, this one, this portion of the graph is this equation. Yes, this function, 3x plus 2. Okay? And this portion of the graph naman is this function, 1 minus 2x. Okay? So you see, when x is equal to negative 2, may naton gap dida, di ba? Adi, tapos adi. Okay. Parang kumbaga nagto-travel ka, tikang ka din, titipo ka to, tapos parang diretso na lang na hingad to. Ay tawag itong jump, nag-jump. So that's why we call this type of discontinuity as finite jump discontinuity, or simply finite jump. Let me write it here. We call this one number 3 type of discontinuity, finite jump. Okay, so tutulo na ha. Ang una, the missing point discontinuity. Ang ikaduha, we have the one-sided limit. Ang ikatulo naman is the finite jump discontinuity, or simply finite jump. Okay, let us have this example. Another example. Y is equal to 4x minus 1 Kali ko dili ha. Y is equal to 4x minus 1 over x minus 3 at x equal to 3. Okay, so again ha, if you have questions, you may ask your questions in the live chat or you can ask dito na atong group chat. Okay, suppose we have this function. By the way, do not be confused ha. Sometimes kasi ta akong ginagamit y. Sometimes ta ginagamit gihap f of x. Parehulay hira. Let us use f of x. F of x is equal to 4x minus 1 all over x minus 3. So we are to discuss the continuity or discontinuity of the function when x is equal to 3. Okay. So when x is equal to 3, okay, so ang unang criteria, di ba nayakang kita? Ang unang criteria, that is dapat an f of a exist. So let us try to check. Does it exist? Nag-exist ba it f of a? O yung mga ni-substitute, f of a, for this case, the value of a is 3. The f of 3 is equal to 4 times 3 minus 1 all over 3 minus 3. Clearly, the denominator will yield 0. 0 it iya value di diha denominator. Any number divided by 0 is undefined. So, ibig sabihin this f of 3 is actually undefined. Undefined. Yan. So, di siya nag-i-exist. Ibig sabihin, wrong na dayon. Ibig sabihin, this type of function is discontinuous at x is equal to 3. Diba? Discontinuous siya at x is equal to 3. Itpakiana, what type of discontinuity is this? Okay. So, paano natin ma-determine kung ano nga type of discontinuity is this? Okay, so first, di ba, ginkuha natin ang iya f of a. Gin-check natin if f of a exists. Okay. Then the second one, ang second kasi nga criteria, that is if the limit, this is not equal. That is the limit of f of x as x approaches to a shall also exist. Okay. So maaram na kita nga this function is discontinuous. Now we are trying to find out what type of discontinuity ini this type of function. Okay, so let us try this second criteria. The limit of f of x as x approaches to a exists. Let us try to solve. So maaram na kita nga undefined hiya number 1. So let us try to solve if this is continuous. If the limit of the function exists. So how do we do that? Okay. Kikitaon mula kung okay, if you are given a fraction, nagiging it iya limit will only exist if you can cancel out the denominator due to a common factor from the denominator. For example ha, para diri na kita magkuanhan table of values. Example, suppose we have x squared minus 9. Tapos may taning mo didi x minus 3. Tapos ginpapabiling ang limit hini nga function as x approaches to 3. Pananglitan lang ha. Okay. So in finding for the limit, di ba ginfa-factor out naton, this is equal to the limit. In factor out the numerator, this is x minus 3 multiplied by x plus 3. All over, copy na lang ang denominator that is x minus 3. Limit na naman. X approaches to 3. Di ba? Clearly, kung adila ning kikitaon, when you substitute 3 here, the denominator will yield a 0. So magiging undefined ang imo function. Okay? So, in evaluating for the limit, bibilngon mo laan ay bangin kasi makakancel out ngayon ang denominator. Like this one, nakakancel out man ngayon, ay makakancel out man ngayon. So, ibig sabihin, this is limit of x plus 3 as x approaches to 3. So, ibig sabihin, when you substitute this na, limit exists na, this is equal to 6. The limit does exist. Okay, nag-i-exist ang limit. That's how we solve if you are given with a fraction. Okay, rational function. Polynomial function ha numerator and another polynomial function ha denominator. So if that's the case, kita alaanay, nakita nimo ano nga when you substitute the value of a, the value of x, ngadtuhan denominator magzi-0. Ayaw laanay dayon i-substitute. Kita alaanay bangin ngayon kasi pwede ngayon ma-cancel out. Just like this case. Okay? If pwede pa cancel out, you do this. Let us try to solve our equation, this equation. Okay. Let us try to solve this equation. Wait lang ha. This is infinity. Okay. So, ano nakita ito ha? We are trying to find the limit. The limit of 4x minus 1 over x minus 3. That is when x approaches 3. Okay, diba? When you substitute this one here, magzi-0 ang denominator. Pero ay laanay. Kita alanay kung may common factor ang denominator ng numerator. May da ba? Okay, may da ba mapa-factor pa ba natin ang numerator? Di ba diri na natin mapapactor ang numerator, ibig sabihin we cannot do anything anymore. So the best thing to do is to substitute na lang dayon. So this will be 4 times 3 minus 1 over this is 3 minus 3. So this is equal to what's this? 12 minus 1 over 0. 0 naman, so this is undefined. Diba? Undefined here. So, ibig sabihin, the limit also does not exist. Okay, so what type of discontinuity? What type of discontinuity is this? Okay, so we have another type of discontinuity, what we call the infinite discontinuity. Let me explain the infinite discontinuity ha. This is number 4. Another type of discontinuity is what we call the infinite discontinuity. Yan. Adil kinikita. Another type of discontinuity is infinite discontinuity. Ano ba ito nga infinite discontinuity? Okay. In infinite discontinuity, characteristic niya, if the limit of the function as x approaches to a certain number from the left approaches positive or negative infinity. Ibig sabihin, undefined, undefined, positive, negative infinity. Okay, this one naman, another criteria is if the limit of f of x as x approaches to a coming from the right is equal to negative positive infinity. Ibig sabihin, if the left-hand limit is positive infinity, dapat ang right-hand limit is negative infinity. If the left-hand limit is negative infinity, dapat ang right-hand limit is positive infinity. So if that's the case, ibig sabihin, we have what we call the infinite discontinuity. And actually, it's so right on it graph. Dapat, infinite discontinuity, I'm talking about the infinite discontinuity. It's so right on it graph, dapat parang nasugad. Parang nasugad. So, ibig sabihin, when x is equal to 0, an immovablyant function, if you are coming from the right, an immovablyant function is positive discontinuity, di ba? If you are getting closer and closer to 0, so ano din when you pag nagtitikahiran ni kanganit 0, ang imo valuehan y, ang imo valuehan function is approaching positive infinity. And if you are coming from the left, approaching 0, ang imo y value is nagiging negative infinity. Parang so ganin hiya. Okay, so ibig sabihin, if that's the case, we have what we call the infinite discontinuity. And the infinite discontinuity is sometimes called as, let me erase this one. Infinite discontinuity is sometimes called as asymptotic discontinuity. Very asymptomatic ha. Asymptotic discontinuity. Asymptotic. Asymptotic discontinuity. Yan. Asymptotic discontinuity. So let us check kung ini nga given function, this one, I will check ha, if this function, ini nga f of x is equal to 4x minus 1 over x minus 3, falls in infinite discontinuity or asymptotic discontinuity. So how do we do that? Kukuhaon natin ang iya left hand limit and an iya right hand limit. Okay. So how do we do that? Okay, let me put it here. So how do we do that? Okay. So kukuhaon natin ang left hand limit, the limit of 4x minus 1 over x minus 3 as x approaches what's that? 3 coming from the left lanay, the left hand limit lanay of 3. Ibig sabihin, ang imo isa-substitute x are numbers coming from the left of 3. Example, it mga left of 3. 2.999. Di ba? 2.999. Okay. Pananglitan, i-substitute tayo ito nga 2.999. This is equal to 4 times 2.999 minus 1 minus 1. Okay, dito naman this is 2.999 minus 3. Okay? So, let us emphasize the denominator. Dili kita pag-focus sa denominator. 'Di ba? Approaching to 3 man, 'di ba? So ibig sabihin, this 2.999 could be 2.9999999. A number very close to 3 but just to the left of 3. Okay, so the result didihini, if you evaluate this one, this will be a very small number. Okay, again, so that the answer is negative infinity because, okay, when you evaluate the denominator, it will yield a very small number almost equal to 0 and negative. My God, sorry. That is negative pala. So the result is negative infinity. So for this case naman, when the limit of the function as x approaches to 3 coming from the right, the value is 3.0001 minus 3. Okay, so when you evaluate the denominator, you would get a very small number also, a very, very small number, almost equal to 0, and also positive. Positive, yeah. Okay, now take note how when you evaluate the numerator, this is positive, and when you evaluate the denominator, almost equal to 0, and this is also positive. So the result is positive infinity. Okay, so you see, the value of the right hand limit and the left hand limit are not equal, and also so the value of the right hand limit is positive infinity and the value of the left hand limit is negative infinity. And since nayakan kita, if that's the case, ibig sabihin this function ini nga function, this is discontinuous at x is equal to 3. And the type of discontinuity is what we call the the infinite discontinuity or the asymptotic discontinuity. Okay, actually, we also have another criteria for ano, and that is, isusulat ko na lang, that is when the limit of f of x as x approaches to a is equal to f of a. Yan. Yan. So these are the three criterias for us to say that a certain function is continuous. Para makayakang kita nga certain function is continuous, we have to satisfy these criterias. And that is, dapat an f of a exists. Dapat an f of a, it should exist. Excuse me. Dapat na exist. And also, dapat the limit of f of x as x approaches to a is also existing. Dapat na exist gap here. And the third one, dapat the limit of f of x as x approaches to a is equal to the value of the function when x is equal to a, f of a. Okay? So these are the criteria for us to say that a certain function is continuous. Okay. So that's it. That's all my lecture for today. Okay. Again, if you have any questions, you can ask me or Ma'am R. Jane in the group chat. Please don't be shy in asking questions. Okay. Also, I sent you already. I uploaded already the practice exercises 2.1. May da add to ha koan ha group. Mm-mm. I already uploaded the practice exercises 2.1 dito ha group. I even sent the link to the group chat. Okay? So the deadline of that practice exercises 2.1 is on Monday. Okay? And the deadline for I also have uploaded na. I already uploaded the practice exercises 2.2 for this topic. Ang topic natin yan na ini nga continuity. The deadline is also on Monday. Okay? Take note ha. Duduha nga practice exercises it ipapasa hit Monday. Okay? Okay, sige. That's all. And thank you for listening.